It's The World This Week. The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. Joining us from London, Nico Hines, world editor for The Daily Beast. How are you? Oh, can we hear you, Nico? Testing 1, 2.
Yeah.
I can hear you.
Okay, loud and clear.
Evening.
Loud and clear. Okay, great. Now that's all cleared up. We can say hello to Vivian Walt, Paris correspondent for Time Magazine. How's your week been?
Really good. Pleased to be here.
Really good. Okay, I'd like to hear more about that. With us as well, Leila Jacinto, senior editor at France24.com, where it's always a really good week, right?
Oh, yes. Never a bad moment.
Never a bad moment. How about over in New York City? I wonder if it's been as cold as it is here. RAI correspondent Antonio Di Bella joins us. How are you?
Hi, Francois. It is very cold today. I don't know how are you, but here I had to put an extra coat today.
Okay. The World This Week on Facebook and Twitter. Hashtag World This Week. It's video testimony before the U.S. Senate that's thrust an unsung hero into the limelight. Capitol Police Officer Eugene Goodman, who on January 6th directed rioters away from lawmakers and in one instance saved Republican Senator Mitt Romney from the wrath of the mob.
In this security footage, you can see Officer Goodman running to respond to the initial breach. Officer Goodman passes Senator Mitt Romney and directs him to turn around in order to get to safety.
Did you know you were that close to those folks when you came down this hall?
No, I did not.
Did you know that was Officer Goodman?
No, I did not know that was Officer Goodman. I look forward to thanking him when I next see him.
Vivian Walt, your reaction to what we've seen unfold at this. We thought this Senate trial wouldn't offer up surprises, but it has.
I would say that the testimony, the whole case that the prosecution has put together has been devastating for Trump, clearly. I mean, we saw security footage we had never seen before. But more than that, I think that they knitted together a narrative very, very based in specific moment-by-moment detail that we really hadn't put together. I think everybody's been in kind of a 5-week state of shock.
Yeah, because it came back to being about the day, about January the 6th.
It came back almost completely about the day, but it was not quite almost because, it was not quite completely because it was also about how Trump himself had laid the ground for that day. I thought in any court of law in pretty much any country, it would be a slam dunk case. But it's not a court of law. It's the Senate. And it's ultimately a political hearing in which the outcome is
It's not a criminal trial. It is a political trial.
It is a political trial in which the outcome is basically foretold. It's baked into the process. And what's just very hard to wrap one's mind around is that it doesn't seem like there is anything that might convince the Republican senators to change their minds.
And we've been hearing this on that point this Friday from Trump's defense team. It rebounded from an atrocious opening day. This time, the defense insisting that throughout his 4 years, the U.S. president's remarks were taken out of context.
Unlike the left, President Trump has been entirely consistent in his opposition to mob violence. He opposes it in all forms, in all places. Just as he's been consistent that the National Guard should be deployed to protect American communities wherever protection is needed. For Democrats, they have clearly demonstrated that their opposition to mobs and their view of using the National Guard depends upon the mob's political views.
All right, that's normally a trial and injury lawyer, Nico Hines, out of Philadelphia there we were listening to. And I got to say, you could disagree with the substance of what he said, but certainly the presentation was stronger than what we saw on Tuesday.
Well, it couldn't be any worse than what we saw on Tuesday, could it? I mean, there's an extent to which this trial is just ludicrous. As Viv says, it's not a real court of law, and this is just basically a political show.
I'm going to interrupt you, Nico, because we're having a little microphone issue. We are having sound problems with London this Friday. Maybe that could get fixed very quickly. We're getting like an annoying rattling noise, but we'll get right back to you. Leila Jacinto, yeah, your thoughts on the back and forth we've seen this week.
Yeah, I'd pick up from Nico because the trial opened, and in fact, on Monday, when the senators met to discuss the constitutionality of having this entire procedure, the prosecution was put up an incredible case, and then Trump's lawyers were a serious disappointment. But you know, when you played that clip, another thing that struck me in the prosecution's case, one of the things, I mean, you know, they were doing several things, you know, laying out what happened on Jan 6th and the lead up to it. But what struck me was also the emphasis that they played on the fact that the mob attacked uniformed personnel, you know, police. And this was a direct rebuttal to what Trump has always said, that blue lives matter. So you know, the case was incredibly good from the prosecution side. The defense, I'm afraid we sort of know what they are going to say, and you know, this is sort of a congressional circus. We know the outcome.
A congressional circus. We know the outcome. Even detractors of Donald Trump, some of them, were saying before the trial began, why go through this if we know that it's not going to convince anyone?
Well, this is always the case. Donald Trump has been impeached before. And I have to say that before this started, I was among the people who said, well, you know, what's gonna come out of it. But I have changed my mind because, as Viv says, you know, this is a case that has been put out, and it is put for the records, and it exposes the Republicans when they actually, in fact, act. They do not act on anything. So I think it is an extremely important procedure right now.
It's one that's being watched around the world.
Well, of course. I mean, I think many people are kind of gripped to television. It's incredible theater. And, you know, the day itself was just so absolutely memorable that, you know, I think it's been quite incredible to see it reenacted and to see all the things we didn't see at the time and to try absorb the impact of what happened. I do, however, have mixed feelings. Like Leila, I have mixed feelings about this happening. Yes, I think it's very important for the historical record, but I also think that here again, we're back here speaking about Trump, and he's not the president anymore, and it seems like we just cannot move on from him. It seems like once again we've made him the most relevant thing in the world.
Well, let me ask you this, because those who are managing the trial have agreed with the Republicans that this is going to be an expedited affair. It's not going to go on for weeks. It's going to be fast. Will the country move on then?
Well, I think that you'll have Trump coming out as a kind of triumphant victor of this, you know, witch hunt that again was, you know, waged against him. He will be acquitted in all likelihood. And that will give him the ability to kind of hit the trail again and start having rallies as the guy that you know, faced down this terrible Democratic you know, vendetta against him and came out somewhat on top in his mind. That's the one scenario that I can see happening.
I have to say that his silence on Twitter is extremely welcome. We have not heard from him since Jan 6th on Twitter, and in that respect, he is silenced. And of course, he has a hardcore base that will probably not be listening to these congressional hearings, and reporters who were covering it, talked about Republican senators who were not really paying attention towards the end of the hearing. So there is...
Yeah, we had the Daily Beast reporting on prominent Trump loyalists inside the well of the Senate chambers, saying Senator Rand Paul finished an elaborate doodle of the Capitol Rotunda. Senator Rick Scott of Florida was poring over a map of Asia. At one point, Trump's attorney, David Schoen, had left the defense his table in the chamber to head across the street for a hit on Fox News.
I think this really ties what Vivian was talking about. Even more of Trump. And President Biden didn't really want this to go on for so long. Because here we are in a new presidency, once again talking about Trump, and there is a sort of an overkill factor. I am really not sure how many people in the rest of the world would have watched the entire proceedings. They would have watched the openings, but we've just had enough of this. Brexit also played out like this. A lot of palaver by politicians, and I really don't think the ordinary person is that interested in sitting through all of this.
All right. We're still going to try to fix those issues with New York and with London, so we'll try to cross back to our other two panelists as quick as we can. Let's move on and talk about what's going on in Myanmar. This Friday, it's Union Day, a national holiday marked by the biggest turnout yet after 7 days of growing protests against last week's coup. Protesters defying martial law and rubber bullets. The junta marking Union Day by releasing prisoners, but it was clearly not enough to dissuade citizens from marching, nor was that warning to civil servants from the night before.
ဒီနေ့ချိန်ကာလမှာနိုင်ငံဝန်ထမ်းအချို့ဟာမတမာသူအချို့ရဲ့တွေးထိုးလှုပ်ဆောင်မှုတွေကြောင့်မိမိတို့ရဲ့လုပ်ငန်းခွင်များကိုပြက်ကွက်နေကြပါတယ်။နိုင်ငံတော်နဲ့ပြည်သူလူထုအပေါ်မှာစေတနာထားတံမိုးထားပြီးလုပ်ငန်းခွင်မှာအခက်အခဲများကြားကတာဝန်ထမ်းဆောင်နေကြတဲ့သူတွေကိုလည်းမတမာသူတွေကအမျိုးမျိုးအသုံးပြုပြီးအနှောက်အယှက်တားဆီးနေကြတာကိုလည်းတွေ့ရပါတယ်။ကျွန်တော်မနေ့က
Effective actions will be taken, and we saw civil servants out this Friday. Viv, nonetheless, it sounds ominous.
This is a country with a very long history of military rule, and I think that in some ways, looking back on the last few years, we were kind of really taken by this idea that Myanmar would be this great new democracy and that Aung San Suu Kyi would be this great new heroine of that democracy. It all fell apart, of course, over the Rohingya, but not only over the Rohingya. The fact is that the democracy was never quite there to begin with. And I think that what we see now is just the consequences of that playing out.
All right. Let me bring in Antonio Di Bella, who's joining us from New York. Antonio, we've seen with the events in Myanmar that we all thought when martial law was declared on Tuesday that that's it. It would all go south since. And yet, here we are Friday, and the protests just seem to be growing.
But it's a result also of the strong, bold approach of Biden. I think Trump would have been different in his response. Immediately, Blinken said, we have to do something. And immediately, Biden personally said, we are going to freeze the money. All the asset of the leader and the relative of the junta in America. It's a lot of money over here. And this makes a difference. And this is coherent with the approach of the new administration who want to defend the human rights anywhere in the world, beginning with Myanmar.
You agree with that, Nico Hines, that the difference this time around is you have Joe Biden in the White House and not Donald Trump?
Yeah, it does remind us of the good old days of America, head of the world police. Obviously, there are some downsides to that, but I think in this instance, it has made a difference and it has helped to galvanise some of those demonstrators. But I think also you have to say, really, this comes down to the bravery and the heroism of those people who are putting their lives at risk. You know, we've seen reports of machine guns being used against protesters, and yet they're still brave enough to go out there. So I think Biden's help will have made a difference, but actually I think really this is a regional issue that the US has relatively small influence on.
Relatively small influence on, Lila Jacinto?
Well, if there are sanctions, unlike in previous years and previous decades, the sanctions are targeted and more effective right now. But the fact is the military junta was extremely smart when they opened up the country in 2011. They didn't put all their eggs in one basket. And they are doing business with the region, with Russia, China, as well as the regional players. And now, you know, we're talking about today is Union Day. Now, Burma is a country that has a center, the central heartlands of Irrawaddy, and the outlying areas which are resource rich, that share borders with China, India, Thailand, Laos. There is a lot of resources there, and the neighboring countries have a lot of strategic interests, security interests as well as business interests, including jade mining, etc. So in terms of the effectiveness of the sanctions, it cannot ever be fully effective because the military junta see it, top generals in Burma, as I call it, see it as their remit to enrich themselves.
And you wrote a piece for France24.com where you say Myanmar's dream of a multi-ethnic nation is slipping away?
Slipping further away. It never was a multi-ethnic nation.
Even though 40% of the country's minorities.
For sure. But to be clear that even these ethnic minorities, like the regional players as well, would much prefer to have Aung San Suu Kyi or some form of democracy rather than this military junta. Because the military, the Tatmadaw, is an extremely difficult entity to deal with, even if you are Beijing and even if you're India. And the military junta, you know, works with Beijing and New Delhi, but they would simply prefer to work with Suu Kyi. So this coup really only benefits the junta, nobody else.
All right, we're going to pick up on these points and more when we come back. Stay with us. You're watching The World This Week. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's The World This Week, The World This Week in partnership with The Daily Beast. World editor of The Daily Beast, Nico Hines, joins us from London here in the studio. Vivian Walt, Paris correspondent for Time Magazine. Lila Jacinto, senior editor at France24.com. And from New York City, RAI correspondent Antonio Di Bella. Antonio, before in part one of our discussion, Viv was saying how we thought it was over for Trump, and yet here we are still talking about him. Are you finding yourself having to file a lot on the 44th president of the United States these days?
Well, Trump is not going to disappear like that. The Trump party, inside the party, or even in a new party, because there are voices today that say that he's going to make a new party. I don't think so, but in any case, his political presence is still heavy. Today, we are discussing here, and at the same moment, the lawyer of the defense are attacking very roughly the Democrat, showing piece of speech. Imagine that this could happen in Europe. Speech in which they use harsh words like fight like hell, in the same way, they say, of Trump. And they've never been indicted for that or accused of subverting the rules. And so it's going to be a social and political divide still going on for a while, and Trump is still alive and kicking.
He's still, you could say, Nico Hines, certainly in the U.S., but maybe beyond, the business plan for many a media outlet.
Yeah, it's difficult not to cover Trump because everybody is so fascinated. There's never been an American president like this. I think it's sometimes easy to say, okay, let's turn the page, let's go back to reality, let's concentrate on Biden. He's the president now. We shouldn't be wasting our time with Trump. But the fact is, Trump is an extraordinary figure in history. And hopefully we'll never have a president like him again. We could get Trump again, of course. The interesting thing about this impeachment trial, if you zoom back from it, is that the Republicans actually have got the chance here to stop Trump being the main story. Most Republicans think that Trump's a dangerous character and think he's a threat to them and to the future of the party. They've got the chance to stop Trump being allowed to run again if they convict him here. But they're too scared to do it. You know, there's that line in The Usual Suspects, how do you shoot the devil in the back? What if you miss?
Okay. Chilling thoughts. Well, we're going to try to move on, Nico. It was the week when Japan's former prime minister had to resign as head of the Olympic Committee organizing this coming summer's Tokyo Games. A Me Too moment for sure, but it appears it was more outside pressure from Olympic sponsors than the Japanese themselves, who forced out Yoshiro Mori for complaining that women talk too much in meetings. Another tangible win for women's rights came with the conditional release of Saudi activist Loujain al-Hathloul. She'd spearheaded the Rights to Drive movement. She'd been behind bars for 3 years. Back in December, she'd been convicted for 5. Her sister Lena, though, is not celebrating. She says it's only parole. She's not been cleared, and the kingdom's got a long way to go when it comes to gender equality.
Women empowerment is a lie in Saudi Arabia, that there are no real reforms. I mean, again, I'll give some examples. Women are allowed to travel now without the consent of their male guardian, but it's only the consent that is needed before traveling. But if a woman decides to travel and the male guardian thinks it's disobeying him or that it's a disappearance, then he can call the police and imprison her.
Yeah, what do you make of the timing of this?
Well, once again, it's Biden, of course. This is so clearly a way to kind of reach out to President Biden, who is going to be radically, and this is perhaps one of the issues that will most define the difference between him and Donald Trump, is Saudi Arabia, which...
So it's an olive branch to the new U.S.
Of course,
president.
but what a kind of weak olive branch. Of course, they had to do something. They had to do something. Biden has already come out saying that he will no longer support the Saudi campaign in Yemen, which was a huge break from Donald Trump. And it could be a lot more ahead in terms of his ability or willingness to confront Saudi Arabia on some key issues.
And importantly, on this one issue, he's got the Republicans and the Democrats in Congress with him. So, this is one of the few issues where there is some bipartisan support. The fact that Loujain was tried in December, which is Biden is elected but not yet inaugurated. So, and when she was tried in December, and she didn't even face a trial for 3 years, it was very obvious that the Saudis were, throwing really a fig leaf, because as Loujain's sister says, she's very much still under parole, and the terms of her parole under the Saudi justice system is extremely fluid. We know for sure that she cannot leave the country, but remember, we're talking about an absolute monarchy where there is no division between the executive, judiciary, or the legislature. So, she's released, but she very much has to be.
Because when there was the murder of Jamal Khashoggi, we stopped hearing as much about the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the reformer. Now, gradually, with a move like this, do we go back to hearing those kinds of noises?
Well, I think if you're a Saudi citizen, you're hearing that he is the reformer anyway. Nobody ever bought that. The fact that Loujain was in jail for asking for a right that the Saudi Crown Prince granted anyway. So I don't think anybody besides the Saudi lobbies really put much at stake with MBS, the reformer. He is managing his internal domestic dynamics, and Khashoggi has has absolutely drawn world attention to this human rights violations.
All right, MBS, the reformer. Certainly it seems so in the eyes of Italy's former prime minister, Matteo Renzi, who last month earned an €80,000 speaking fee to appear alongside the Crown Prince at an investment conference. Was that a scandal in Italy, Antonio Di Bella?
It was, because Renzi left Italy and has to come back in a hurry during the most important steps of the crisis. Obviously, he tried to downplay the importance of the meeting, on the speech, but the timing was terrible, because in the moment he was very able and capable to maneuver and to make Conte fail. At the same time, in the same hours, he was discussing and using the word renaissance for the situation in the Emirates, in the Saudi Arabia. And in face of the violation of the human rights, it's a sin. Obviously, all the former presidents, I could say Sarkozy, Blair, go around making conference. It's not a scandal. But the timing and the use of the word renaissance for that area, it's something that was shocking for some Italians, not all of them.
Nico Hines, speaking fees for current and former leaders. I know there's a former UK prime minister who seems pretty good at that.
Yeah, he's the best. Tony Blair is an extraordinarily wealthy man, and he's managed, like many of these controversial world leaders, has managed to enrich his entire family as well. There was a story recently over here that Ewan Blair is worth something like £70 million now, which is, I think, even more maybe than his father. But I think there's a real threat here, and it's something that we see over and over again, which is the way that these oil-rich nations are trying to win influence around the world, and it's working. You look at Paris Saint-Germain, and obviously Saudi Arabia tried to copy that model by investing in Newcastle, which is obviously a club that's not quite as high-ranking at the moment, but they believed that they could pump money into it, turn Newcastle into a huge Champions League club, and therefore, it could be a way to make people see Saudi Arabia in a more forgiving light. And that's what MBS is all about. He is trying to wash the reputation, partly that he himself has created with his bloodthirsty tactics, but he will spend as much money as he can to try and win people over to see Saudi Arabia as the new Dubai.
All right. We were talking about Matteo Renzi, the same Matteo Renzi who, as Antonio was saying, when he brought down Italy's government, offered up this appraisal of his spoiler role in an interview with newspaper La Repubblica. It is likely that I am the most unpopular in the country. It is unlikely that Conte is the most popular, but it is certain that Draghi is the most competent. That's okay. A guy who polls at 3%, nonetheless, can still loom large in Italy, Antonio.
Well, the approval comes and go. Even Monti was popular when he became prime minister, and in a couple of months he became unpopular. The difference is that Monti had to cut expenses, and Draghi had the money. He's the guy who came from Europe with bags full of money. For this reason, I think the approval of Draghi will last, but the division inside the strange, big, so wide alliance will become clearer in a matter of weeks. I don't know how people so different, like the extreme left of Liberi Uguali, of Speranza, can stay together with Salvini and the League. So until yesterday, Salvini was against Europe and wanted to go out of euro. And so it's going to be problem of timing. At the beginning, everything will all right. In a few weeks, we'll see something happening, I fear.
All right. Now that Beppe Grillo, by the way, his five-star movement has also backed Draghi's bid to form a government, and he's been to see the president at the palace. Cartoonist Gianelli and newspaper Corriere della Sera painting the former boss of the ECB as Superman in what looks kind of like the kind of circus you'd find in Fellini's classic movie, La Strada. It is surprising, Vivian Walt, when you look at Italian politics.
Well, we'll see how long Mario Draghi actually lasts, as Antonio says. But I mean, I think it's kind of a masterstroke to have tapped Draghi, who, after all, did survive some of the roughest years at the European Central Bank. I mean, he oversaw, Europe's worst financial crisis in many, many years. So, and seems to have a fairly wide credibility, at least on the level of Italian politics. But what's so incredible, especially from a country like sitting in France, where the president, at minimum, changes every 5 years. But what's so incredible is how fragile the Italian governing system.
More stable of late.
More stable, a little bit of late, but still rather pretty unstable.
All right. And while Mario Draghi probably knows a lot more than anyone around this table about the euro, how much does he know about Bitcoin? Why is its value suddenly skyrocketing? And why has Elon Musk, in this speculative frenzy, announced that you'll be able to buy his cars using the cryptocurrency? Here you see the value of Bitcoin, which over the past 6 months has skyrocketed. Yeah, it's in the last week that we've heard from Musk in tweets that are unmistakably his. If anyone on the panel, I'm looking for volunteers, can explain to me why Bitcoin is worth what it is, feel free to jump in. Leela Jacinto.
I'm gonna hand that to Vivian. Why Bitcoin is, it beats me.
It's incredible. The first that Bitcoin suddenly rose, and then and then these announcements by Elon Musk.
I mean, it's a little bit what happened, like what happened with GameStop. I mean, the fact is that there is sort of wild speculative movements going on in the financial markets, and it doesn't spell very good things for the future of the economy. It feels a little bit like something could go pop, and that we could be headed for terrible trouble. In terms of Musk, I mean, as we know from previous tweets that he's put out over the years, he's extremely partly unfiltered. He doesn't really care what he says. That's unlike any other CEO of a publicly traded company.
Yeah, for Fortune magazine, you spoke with Musk and asked about his new factory being built near Berlin. But you said you were on the phone with him for an hour?
I think we might have been on the phone for about 40 minutes, but that's a classic Elon Musk thing.
So what's it like being on the telephone with Elon Musk?
Well, firstly, he calls up, pretty much, without warning. And he was calling from home. The baby was crying. The dog was barking. At one point, he stepped out into the garden to talk. But it's not like interviewing any other major CEO where you would have, the press people around. He doesn't care what he says. At one point, we got into talking about politics and his views on Biden and Trump, and he really didn't give a damn what he was going to say. He was calling from his cell phone to my cell phone, and that is in some ways why people are so fascinated by him and why he is such a unique character.
When I was a kid, Antonio Di Bella, you had panini cards with soccer players, footballers, stickers, and you'd put them in an album. It seems like, and it seems like today you have it's almost like you have panini cards with these sort of captains of industry, where they have this incredible rock star following. How do you explain it in the case of Elon Musk?
Senatrice Castelli, quale sarà conferito l'incarico per le... I cannot hear in this moment.
L'onorevole Massimo Garavaglia.
Try to fix my...
Multitasking, Antonio, there. I'll put it to Nico Hines then, while you settle that issue. Nico.
Musk's going to say next. I think that's what's turned him into this superstar. I certainly wouldn't be betting long-term on anything that he promised. It struck me, Viv mentioned the GameStop similarity, and Elon Musk was one of the people who was tweeting along, enjoying the kind of frenzy that came from that as hedge funds were forced to resolve their short positions. And I wouldn't be at all surprised if Elon Musk turned around in a few weeks and said, it was all a joke. I was trying to catch out some hedge funds, or I was trying to prove some clever point of mine. The latest one is that he's even now supporting Dogecoin, which was set up as a joke kind of meme currency in the first place. He's now bought some of that for his son, and as a result of that, the value has shot up as well. So I think he's fun to watch, and it's interesting to listen to what he's saying, but I wouldn't be betting my house on anything that he thought would happen in the long term.
I don't get it, because we're talking about what is on paper as of, a week ago or 2 weeks ago, the richest man in the world?
Yeah, well, his Tesla operation does seem to be going rather well. You have to hand that to him. And it will be fascinating to see how that plays out now as he tries to really compete in Europe. He's got this problem, which is that every other car manufacturer is now starting to realise that electric cars are the future. And of course, he's saying that's a great win for his foresight, and indeed it was. But what's to guarantee that the Tesla car will be more popular than the BMW or the Volkswagen in the next 10, 20 years? So again, fortunes can go up as well as down.
Does Tesla have a problem? One chart from Vivian Walt's article for Fortune shows electric car production and how, the competition is really revving up, Vivian. And Volkswagen, the world's number one maker, is suddenly in the game.
Yeah, I mean, they're very late, of course. I mean,
but does it matter if they're late?
Maybe not. I mean, we'll see within 3 years, maybe. I mean, what the Germans have, of course, the Germans produce probably the finest cars in the world, and Elon Musk says that himself, which is why he's setting up in Germany, because they've got the best auto engineers in the world. They also have gigantic factories. If you've ever been to the VW headquarters, which, if you remember, was built by Adolf Hitler, it's a city. And here's Musk trying to build it from scratch. So
he's near Berlin there.
He's right in Berlin, 20 kilometers from Berlin. So, VW could quite easily overtake him very quickly, as could BMW or Daimler or one of these enormous German automakers. And of course, the Chinese are producing, thousands upon thousands of electric vehicles. So what Musk is doing, which will be very interesting, is he's building perhaps one of the biggest battery factories in the world in Berlin. And that could really change things fundamentally, globally.
Lila Jacinto, your thoughts on it's the future of transport that's at stake right now?
I think it's the future of Elon Musk and the publicity he gets. So, his electric car is a bit late, but seasoned auto manufacturers could overtake him. He's, we seem to have this celebrity culture for our businessmen, and Elon Musk seems to be the maverick. Well, last year he had SpaceX, and I remember, in the newsroom we had to cover it, so we had to have the Twitter live feed on. At the same time, there was, Black Lives Matter protests were happening, and I tweeted this American jazz poet Jill Heron Scott saying, ain't got no money to pay the rent, ain't got no money to pay the bill, but Whitey's on the moon. So there is. Elon Musk, spins his narrative, and the media creates it. So, I'm waiting to see how many jobs he creates in Germany, and I'm waiting to see how many batteries he builds. But until such time, he's his own story.
All right, a master of publicity. We agree on that. Lila Jacinto, many thanks. I want to thank Vivian Walt, Antonio Di Bella in New York. I want to thank Nico Hines for being with us from London. Thank you for joining us here for the world this week.